Listen up, fellow Democrats. Fight fake news and lies with facts. Save our democracy from right-wing hypocrisy. Keep our integrity, embrace our diversity. Whenever we're down, we always come back. So listen up, Democrats.
Hello, welcome to Progressive Oregon, a weekly engagement broadcast on progressive issues in Oregon. My name is Larry Taylor. I'm your host along with Betsy Cunningham. And just so you know, this is an interactive live stream broadcast. So if you go to the YouTube channel for Uphill Media, you can type in questions, and periodically throughout the show, we will switch to the questions and try to answer them to the best of our ability. In today's show, we're going to start with a weekly update. Then we have Alana Lenahan, the new chair of the Douglas County Democrats, talking about the resignation of Jeff Cruz. Then we're going to talk about what has changed in the candidate filing between the last time we discussed this and now, which has been about 3 weeks. And we're going to talk about how democracies die. Then we'll do some final questions and answers and wrap up the show. So the first big piece of news, which everyone should be aware of, is that ballot measure 101 passed, and it passed resoundingly. The day after it passed, Julie Parrish, one of the sponsors of the legislation, was saying that she really just wanted to have a conversation about the tax, which is one of the stupidest things I've ever heard. She, along with Cedric Hayden and Saul Esquivel, were sponsors of this piece of legislation, of this referral to the voters. The legislation itself was supported by the hospitals and by a wide coalition of people. And one of the benefits of the legislation was that it made us eligible for more federal money, so that we actually have more money to spend on healthcare in Oregon. And I don't know what their particular beef, other than a philosophical opposition to anything that the Democrats propose, but they went around and collected signatures and got this referred to the ballot, and now that has been settled. It passed in Multnomah County by 80%, which is an almost unheard of majority. So Oregon, you just spent $4 million on a pointless ballot referral, and at least it's settled for now, and it's not the major topic that they have to spend time on in the legislature, which is meeting right now for its short session, and they can worry about other things. The next thing that happened in the past couple of weeks is that the county commissioners of Clackamas, Multnomah, and Washington met, and they chose from amongst 3 nominated candidates for replacement to Richard Devlin. The candidates were Daphne Wisham, Claudia Black, and Rob Wagner. Rob Wagner was the one selected, so he's now the newest senator in the Senate for Oregon. Rob's a great guy, and we hope that he delivers all the promise that he's showing at this point in time. The other big thing that happened this last week was at the Multnomah County Democrats meeting. The Multnomah County Democrats have, since their overhaul, the last reorganization has really just exploded with energy. They had to move back to the senior center for their meetings because so many people are attending. This is an organization I was chair of some 18 years ago, where we met at the senior center, but it was only about half the people in attendance back then. It was sad because there was only one person there from 18 years ago. Everyone else was new. But the most newsworthy thing that happened was that they had a referendum on the integrity of the Democratic Party of Oregon, and it was sponsored by one of the younger members. His name is Michael, and he's probably in his 20s. And it's all part of this greater movement that's going on to restore integrity to the way the Democratic conducts itself. In summary, the resolution called upon the Multnomah County Democrats, the DPO, and the Democratic National Committee to make a formal commitment to honesty, accountability, transparency, and party consensus by memorializing these values in the bylaws that are legal and ethical. And they requested that the DPO chair and the Multnomah County Democrats chair establish a process for providing access to all DPO business records. The language was in the actual resolution, but it passed, and there were only 2 people in the room that voted against it. So there was overwhelming consensus in that group for the Democratic Party to clean up its act. This is something that they are rolling forward from their convention, and it should also show up in the at the platform convention in March. The thing that I was a little uncomfortable with was the process by which they used for handling this measure. We've talked in this show about the fundamentals of parliamentary procedure, concepts like who has standing to participate in this stuff. Precinct committee people are elected by the Democrats in their counties, and they're the only ones that have standing to deal with these kinds of resolutions. When they were considering this resolution, the chair of the Rules Committee announced that the chair of the Democratic Party of Oregon had called up and had called in some revisions. And so, as an aside, they went off and actually revised a resolution that had been worked on for weeks and weeks and weeks by the Rules Committee. And so she showed up with revisions that night on the floor. This is something that the previous version had been published, and that's what everyone had read, and it's what they expected to vote on. But again, the Multnomah County Democrats sat there and let them get away with this. The chair of the Democratic Party has no standing in Multnomah County. She's not even as far as I know, she's not a resident of Multnomah County, and she's certainly not a PCP of Multnomah County. And she has no standing to call up and make changes to that. So the chair of the Rules Committee took it upon herself to incorporate those changes. And I couldn't really tell if it was watering down or letting them off the hook, but it's my understanding that the language started out much more strongly, and it's continually been watered down. But the good news is that it got passed, and it's going to be a journey to get the Democratic Party to where we want it to be, and nothing that's going to result in anything happening immediately. Again, there are 3 chapters of the National Association of Parliamentarians in Oregon, and if any of you would like to study parliamentary procedure and the fundamentals of democratic processes, I encourage you to reach out and join the groups. There is the ability to have a virtual group, which I've been toying with the idea of starting it. So I realize that people in Wallowa County and Lake County can't drive to Portland for a meeting of the parliamentarians, and this is a great place for where a virtual meeting could be conducted, and we could start getting the whole culture of democracy more widely understood. So when we go to meetings and we're having our rights taken away from us, we know when it's happening and we can object. So first on our program today, we have the esteemed chair of the Douglas County Democrats, Alana Lenahan. Welcome, Alana.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here.
So you were just recently elected. When did that happen?
January 25th. We just held our election. So just a couple of weeks.
Cool. And Douglas County is very interesting because even though you're heavily Republican, you've got a very active progressive group that's been growing and growing down there for years. And one of our first allies in the anti-LNG fight was Douglas County. It was Douglas County that joined with Clatsop County in 2008 and got the first resolution passed opposing LNG in the Democratic Party of Oregon. That was 2 chairs ago. So we have fond feelings for our friends in Douglas County. So tell us what happened to your representative.
To Jeff Cruz. Oh, this has been in the works, and it started. I know that there's been a lot of focus on the sexual harassment, but I think that really the death knell for him as our senator started way back with his disregard for the law regarding smoking in the building. That was a very big telltale sign about how he felt he was above the rules. And then when the sexual harassment claims started coming out, those accusations coming out, there was a lot more ability to believe the accusers because we already knew he disregarded the rules. He felt that was beneath him to have to do the same thing that everybody else did. So it's really startling. I haven't read the full report, but I've read a lot of it. But we're talking about behavior that goes back almost the entire time that he's been in the legislature. And that's really startling. It's startling that it was tolerated for so many years, even if it wasn't reported. The report says that multiple occasions of this harassment are shown on videotape on the legislative floor. So, I mean, that means that other people saw it and it was tolerated. Nobody said anything, and that's really frightening. So.
Yeah, we talked about this on the show a couple of months ago when it first broke, and I was astonished because legislators always talk about how hard they work in Salem and all the long hours they put in. It's like, where does this guy find time to do this kind of stuff if you're so busy?
Mm-hmm.
And then for everyone to be complicit. I mean, Salem is a very cozy little group of people in the Capitol building, and there, I doubt if there's much that goes on that not everyone is aware of. And so for everyone to have tolerated this for so long is really astonishing.
Exactly. Well, and it's really been reading Facebook comments and comments on articles for the News Review and the Oregonian from people who live here in Douglas County about his behavior and how he's just a good old boy and we should just let it pass, and we don't understand. It's an age thing. It's a generational thing. He didn't mean anything by it. I think I walk the streets with these men who feel that it's okay to behave this way. That's really scary.
Yeah, I was down when I visited you a couple of weeks back. I was walking back to the car and I passed a church sign, and it said, "Jesus loves me, this I know." And you just don't see signs like that up in the metro area or even in where I live in Clatsop County. It's a whole different culture down there. So how good of a representative was he for you? Did he represent you, the people, and did he meet with you and carry your concerns to Salem and fight for you?
I've been really active here in Douglas County for about 4 years, and I know of one town hall meeting he's held in the 4 years. So no, he doesn't represent the entire population. He definitely has never been open to hearing opinions outside of his party. It's been appeared quite obvious from an outsider standpoint that he takes his direction directly from the Republican Party locally and on the state level. That he's not there to represent his constituents, he's there to represent his party.
When I was looking for a picture last night, I came across the results from the 2016 primary, and his opponent got 15% of the vote in the primary, and Jeff Cruz got 85% of the vote. That's just an overwhelming vote for someone who doesn't seem to do it. didn't seem to do a lot for the populace. What was going on there?
I think I know for Douglas County, and I can't speak to Coos and Curry County and the small portions of Jackson and Josephine County that are in his district, but I know here it's all name recognition. This is a good old boys club, and they just want to know your name, and they mark the ballot. Most of the voters here are not engaged in the process. They're not looking at the issues. They're not paying attention to the voting record. They just know that they know that name, and so they mark the ballot. So there's not really any conversation about what you stand for or what you're doing on the legislative level. So, we have a completely uninformed voter base. And that's just the people who vote, much less the people who don't vote. And I mean, which is a huge percentage, especially here in Douglas County. So, but yeah, We just, it's really frightening. It really is.
I know you've you've given a lot of thought to this, and we haven't found the secret sauce. Do you have you come up with a strategy on how to talk to people about issues that are relevant to them as opposed to relevant to a party philosophy?
I'd have to say no. We're working really hard on it, but I know that every time I enter a conversation, like back when Measure 101 was going on, and I would enter a conversation and I'd say, explain to me why you're opposed to this. Just, I want to know why you're opposed to it. And they would give some unfounded reason, some reason not based in fact on the actual measure. And you go, okay, I understand where you're coming from, but did you know that it actually says this and not that? And then they shut you down. So we're in this, they're just in a bubble and they don't want to hear what you have to say. I think for us here locally, the strategy that we need to have is to pull the people who are progressive or left-leaning or even moderate out of the shadows, because they're here, but for so long we've been dominated by the Republicans that they're afraid to stand up, they're afraid to make their voices heard, and they've just quit voting because they feel they're never going to win. So we need to pull those people out and start talking to them and not talking to the people who are never going to agree with us.
It all goes back to us getting and demanding that we take our democracy back. And I don't know how. At some point, you start sounding like a crazy person. It's like, what do you mean our democracy is gone? So we're going to talk a little bit later in the program about democracy and the status of that. But it's like everyone has to get active and everyone has to understand how their rights and their democracy has been taken away from them. And they have to start demanding it back. And you would think that something like healthcare, where it really is a life and death matter. I mean, if you don't get treatment and you have a terminal disease, you're going to die. And so, I've just entered retirement and turned 65, and I'm starting to understand how screwed up the system is. For years, I never went to the hospital because I'd always been generally healthy, and now that I've been exposed to it, it's just appalling that this country has a system like that. And there's two different things. There's our research and development, which is first class and top of the world. So yeah, we can research this stuff, but it's our delivery system of the healthcare that sucks and needs to be fixed. And we just spent months talking about DACA, and it's like, really, Democrats, have you forgotten all about healthcare? Is that put to bed now until you take over the majority at the end of this year? Is that the plan? I don't know what's going on.
And I will have to say, my generation, part of your generation, we disengaged from this whole political process. Things were, if you look back into the 70s when we were coming of age, things were good. We had a fairly decent middle class, things were going well, and we thought our government was doing what it was supposed to be doing. So we sort of disengaged and we let them do their thing. And now we're reaping the rewards for that because, we didn't follow through. We didn't pay attention to our vote. We didn't pay attention to what the government was doing. And you can see the degradation over the last 40 years.
I've been working my way through Ken Burns' documentary on the Vietnam War, and apart from the good parts of the 70s, there was the Vietnam War that was going on, and in the 60s, and the protests were far more extensive than I realized at the time. I was living in a rural part of the West Coast, and so I never saw what was happening in the big cities. But I was watching that, and it just felt like what has been occurring in the past couple of years, where people go to demonstrations and they do protests, but they have not realized that the real path to power is who they elect into office. And so, I'm hoping that by the time I get to disc 10 of the set, that he talks about what was happening with our elected officials, and was anyone trying to elect anyone differently? Because until you change who is in office, you are not going to get a change in behavior.
Yep. Exactly, exactly. And that means being an educated voter and paying attention to the issues and knowing who you're voting for and actually voting. If we look back at the last presidential election, if the people who didn't vote had actually voted, I mean, that was almost the majority of the eligible voters who didn't vote. So that could have completely changed the results of the election just by that huge number of people who didn't vote, which I believe was over 48%. It was a very large number.
Yeah.
And
Betsy, do we have any questions on the line? Apparently
I
not.
don't see any. No, I don't see any questions. Sorry.
I got a question. So you're this primary of Cruz. This is the Republican primary. Was there a Democratic challenger, and how well did they do? Or is this a really super red district?
it is a very red district. He did have a challenger in the general. Let's see, that was Tim Rolick, and he got about 26.5% of the vote.
Ouch.
And Tim Rolick was a fantastic candidate. He did have some personal stuff that came up in the middle of the election process. So he was physically not here for a short period of time, which I think affected his campaign. And that was reflected in the numbers. I think if he had been able to focus entirely on the campaign, he would have done much better. Because he was a great candidate, and he's a great guy. I've met him on several occasions. I've actually talked to him last week, and he would have made a fantastic legislator.
Can you? Yeah, and we were talking in Green Room. Can you explain the process of how now with Cruz's departure, how a new person will get picked? Because it was a little confusing.
It is. It's very confusing, and maybe Larry may know more than I do. But the way it was explained to me, what's going to happen is the county commissioners for the 5 counties that are included in this district will meet, and they will come up with 3 to 5 candidates to replace Cruz. And then, let me back up. The Republican Party in those 5 counties will meet and come up with 3 to 5 candidates to replace Cruz. And then the county commissioners from those counties will vote, and they have weighted votes. So like Curry County is fully encompassed in District 1. So it will be based on population. They may get a little bit heavier of a vote because of the population count, or it may swing to Douglas County. I haven't actually pulled the numbers to look at them to see how that's going to go. So those county commissioners from those counties will vote, and then they will make the replacement. Now, the really interesting thing is that they don't get this done in 30 days. My understanding is Kate Brown will appoint a replacement. So that's, that I'm sure that with that on the horizon, the Republicans are going to be all over this to make sure that they get a replacement done. And then after that, the Democratic Party will meet. And we will actually select a candidate to run in November because it will be more than 61 days until the next general election. We will actually have an election for Cruz's seat come November. So we will need to find a candidate to run in that seat. And depending on who the Republicans pick, who the county commissioners pick to fill that seat, it could be a really interesting election.
So who are the names that are being talked about as a possible replacement for Cruz?
The ones that I've heard floated around on the internet right now are Dallas Hurd, David Brock Smith, and then surprise, surprise, Tim Freeman, who is Douglas County Commissioner, which really surprised me that would be somebody they would pick. I know he served in the legislature before, and he said it really wasn't his cup of tea, and he came back to run as a county commissioner. So I'm not sure if somebody's, just throwing out a rumor or if that's something that he's actually looking at. It's like somebody said on Facebook yesterday, there's a huge money difference between a county commissioner position and a senator's position. It's about $50,000. So I don't know which way he'll go, but Tim Freeman is picked, and if that's who their selection is, that actually opens up a really interesting scenario here in Douglas County, because that will open up his county commissioner seat, which is actually on the ballot in May. Their selection probably will not be announced until after the filing date for that position. So what does that do for us as a county commissioner candidate? Hopefully we can pull somebody, that will run against him on the off chance he takes it, and then he or she could run unopposed.
And I wasn't, for those of us who don't live in that area, give us some background to the other two candidates.
David Brock Smith is a state representative for District 2, I think. And then Dallas Hurd is the state representative for District 2. David Brock Smith is the representative for District 9. I could be wrong on his district because it's not anywhere near my district, so I'm not 100% sure. But he's a state representative. David Brock Smith is fairly new, my understanding, and I don't know a whole lot about him. So, but Dallas Hurd is dumber than a bag of rocks. The man has not an original thought. Anybody who's ever heard him speak will tell you that there's just not a whole lot going on there. He is there. Yeah, he specifically takes all his instruction from the Republican Party because he cannot come up with a thought on his own.
So this sets up the same dynamic that we've often seen in the Democratic Party, where a representative moves up to a senator seat, and then you go through the same process that you described for the replacement of the representative. And since they're all Republicans, the replacement's still going to be a Republican. But it does open up an opportunity for a Democrat to have maybe a better chance, since they're not running against a locked-in incumbent.
Right. And David Brock Smith and Dallas Hurd are both up for election this year. So if either one of them takes Cruz's seat, then, we have an open position there that we could run a candidate in. So.
Well, that's mind-boggling what happens. So then
it's really complicated. It's a lot more complicated than I thought it would be.
Yeah. So the Republicans then, if one of the representatives moved up, then, and it's after the filing date, then I believe it's the Republican parties, again, from the counties, that would come up with a candidate to replace him on the ballot to run in November
Right.
in the general.
Right.
Cool.
So what we have to do as progressives, Democrats, independents, non-affiliated voters is find a candidate for those positions just on the off chance that one of them is picked, because that actually gives us some leverage. Because if we have a candidate that we're prepared to run and they have to bring in a candidate at the last minute, we'll have a leg up.
Yeah.
So at least we can hope we have a leg up.
Yeah, and we talked about this before, and it sort of flips the power of the PCPs that we've talked about in the previous editions that the Democrats have. Now it's the Republican precinct committee people who actually will be voting on the replacement for one and possibly two members of the legislature. And it's one of the duties that comes with being a precinct committee person. And as everyone should know by now, the forms are available to run for a precinct committee person, and you have to file it with your county clerk by March 6th.
And I believe you can actually fill out and submit the form online.
I haven't heard that far, but I personally wouldn't trust the system. I would walk down physically with a copy, or with someone I trust to physically hand it to the clerk. So there was no ambiguity about having turned in the form.
I have a really funny story about that. The first time I was elected as a PCP, I didn't even know I was running. Somebody had handed me a form and I signed it, not knowing what I signed.
and when I showed up on the ballot.
When I saw my name on the ballot, I'm like, what the heck? How'd that happen?
Betsy, any questions on the line? Alana, any final closing remarks you'd like to say today?
I'm just hoping people are paying attention to what's going on with Jeff Cruz's seat, because this is a great civics learning experience. And this is not something that happens a lot. So I just really hope people are paying attention, and it creates some interest in what's going on on the state level and on the local level, as far as what politics is doing and what our government's doing. So.
I just
All righty. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you.
And we'll see you soon.
Okay, thanks, Dick.
Bye. So our next segment is about the update on the primary filing. So according to my Excel calculations, it's 23 days from today until March 6th, which is the filing deadline. If we go to the slides entitled Statistics for the Oregon House, it is not a pretty picture in terms of democracy. So there are 60 House seats that are up for election. They get elected every 2 years. There is only one House primary seat out of 60 that has a choice in both the Republican and Democratic Party, and that's House District 53. So in that district, both the both the Democrats and the Republicans are going to have a choice on the primary ballot in May. There are 6 Democratic primaries where there's a choice, so that means that 54 races, there are no choices for the Democrats, and 3 Republican primaries have a choice, which means that 57 Republican seats do not have a choice. And there's one race where there's an independent party candidate that's running. So 36 uncontested Democratic primaries, 24 uncontested Republican primaries, and then even worse, at this point in time, there are 34 seats that will be uncontested in the general because the opposing party has not fielded a candidate at this point in time. And so really the winner of the general is going to be the winner of the primary. So it's a very unhealthy situation. And we love the representatives in the legislature who do a responsible job of representing their constituency, but you can see how the voters can start being taken for granted because they really don't have a choice in the election. Statistics on the Oregon Senate side. So there's 30 positions in the Oregon Senate, of which 15 are up for election every 2 years. There is no Senate primary that has a choice in both parties. There are 3 Democratic primaries that have a choice, and there are no Republican primaries that have a choice. So Republicans, you're going to go with who has filed, unless something happens in the next 23 days that changes the dynamics. Whoever runs is who you have to vote for because you don't have any options. And if they get through the primary, then they're going to win in the general. This is extremely unhealthy in terms of a democracy, and as a result of the culture that has been fostered over the past 12 or so years by the leadership of both parties. I think both parties are guilty of this. They think that it is bad form to have a challenger against an incumbent in the primary, and we are, it's related to the resolution that was passed in Multnomah County. There's a growing number of people that are demanding that things be done in a democratic and transparent way, and that there's no backroom deals cut and preferential treatment given for certain candidates over other ones, because there are, believe it or not, legislators who are not really good representatives of their constituency. Any comments on the line from that, Betsy?
No, I don't see any questions about that, but I have a question about, here in Douglas County, as everywhere, we have difficulty, as your data shows, finding people to run for office. How can we encourage progressives to do that in Oregon?
Well, the argument I use unsuccessfully is that, it's better to have an opponent who is probably going to lose than to have no opponent at all, because at least you force a discussion. And you would think that amongst all of the activism that's happened since the November 2016 election, that all of that energy that's being poured into meetings would also transform into candidates for office. I've seen a little bit of it at the local level, but very little of it at the state level. You don't even have to form a political action committee if you're going to spend less than $750. You can run a campaign that at least sparks a dialogue, and you can do things like leverage free media. You can do things like issue press releases and demand accountability from the people in power, and do things that get your name out there. You do not have to burn through $250,000 to run a campaign. If you're in a predominantly Republican district and you can't deliver a message like Bernie Sanders did, which cuts through all the political crap and really speaks to what is important to people, then it's a little bit tougher. But if you can find someone that can do that, it's possible you have a chance. And then you always have the circumstance where someone has to leave office, and it's a rare occurrence, but it does happen. And if you happen to be the only candidate on the ballot and your opponent somehow has to drop off, then you end up being the candidate that at least has an advantage.
We do have a question from Rednecknomics. Does it cost to file, and if so, how much?
It does. Well, there's two processes. You can do signatures, or you can just write a check. I don't know how much it is. It's not an onerous amount of money. I would recommend that you pay the money and just go for it. It takes time to collect signatures, and the time that you spend collecting signatures should really be spent on working on your actual campaign. But it's not very much money.
I want to throw this out here, Larry. We're talking about how to find a candidate, and I think it's backwards. From all of our experiences running this network and trying to get candidates and trying to help them, it seems like what we really need to do is have a group like the Progressive Oregon or Washington Bernie-crats or whatever group it happens to be that says we need to find a person to fill this role, and we need to be able to support that person, because there's not a candidate that's going to be able to do this and start from scratch. That's the biggest drawback, is saying, oh, so I'm going to run and I have to build the people around me. It should be the group that seeks the person and then forms the support structure around that person first, in my opinion.
You are absolutely right. And I don't know what's going on. I don't know why those groups are not floating the candidates to run.
I don't either.
I've heard that the Social Democrats, if they endorse someone in the Portland area, will actually put boots on the ground and physically support them, and that's great. I mean, the groups that endorse but don't do anything in terms of either donating money or donating labor, I don't value their endorsement whatsoever. That's like the cheap and easy way of doing something in a campaign. To me, if someone's got a bunch of establishment endorsements, all that means is that they're an establishment candidate, and I would vote for their opponent if they had one. But in most cases, they don't have them. So,
right.
The Bernie groups, if you really want to do something and make a difference in Salem, you need to get candidates out there and run them for office. Even though it's really late to get started, the truth of the matter is, if there is no, in the primary, it's a little bit late to be running a campaign, but it can still be done. For all of you out there who live in districts where if you field a Democratic candidate, they're going to be unopposed in the primary, and so you still have a long runway in which to wrap up a campaign between now and November. So all is not lost, and that's really why we called today's segment 23 days, because we still have 23 days in which to do something.
Nice.
Yeah, Larry, I think that there was a comment made or question about, I think there's a need to clarify, the Democratic Party, Progressive Oregon, and the Progressive Party in Oregon.
There actually is a party called the Progressive Party. There's been there's been an explosion of parties. When I was in Douglas County, one of the guys in your audience said, I just was researching the filings, and all it takes is filing a form to form a party, and it's true. And there used to be about 11 parties, and the thing I was looking at last week shows something more like on the order of 15 or 16. There's a no tax party. Some of these parties are very small. They are all but 3 of the parties are minority parties, which means that they don't have the kind of infrastructure that you find with the Democrats and the Republicans. The third major party in Oregon for now is the Independent Party, and they've opted out of having that sort of precinct committee person structure. And then so you then have all of the other third parties. So there's the Working Families Party, which is fairly active, and you have the remnants of the Green Party, and you have the Constitution Party, you have the No Tax Party, and you have all these other third parties, of which one is the Progressive Party. I have read their beliefs on their website, and they're consistent with the sort of beliefs that you find with the progressive movement. But they've not risen up to the point of becoming a major party and able to field candidates like we would see. So Progressive Oregon itself is a organization that is dedicated to restoring integrity to the democratic process itself. It works a lot with the Democratic Party itself, because that's where all the power in the state is. Why would you devote energy into a party which doesn't have a member in the legislature where they can even field a bill for you? So, the Democratic Party is dominant, and it's where if you have the potential to exert influence, it's where the potential exists. So that's what the Progressive Party, or the Progressive Oregon group, does, is promote ethical democratic processes and support candidates in theory for running. We've not ourselves found candidates that we're running, although there are some associated with our group that are running, and we hope that they are successful.
And I want to clarify something. No Schultze, Larry is not the chair of the Progressive Party. He is the chair of the Progressive Oregon, which is a PAC. If you want to just explain that, Larry.
Yes, and for all the people that freak out about PACs, it turns out that you if you're going to spend money doing stuff, you have to form a PAC, because Oregon has a very transparent political financial reporting system, and so it's a state requirement. And so it's the kind of thing that and it's really hard to do anything without money. You can camp out in free spaces if you can find them. But if you're not printing literature and having a website and making all those kinds of expenditures, it's really hard to have a effective presence. There are a couple of groups that are being run out of people's personal bank accounts, and that really sort of puts them at risk. So everyone in Oregon really needs to realize that if you're going to be spending money on political activity, you need to be one form or a PAC or another. There are good PACs and there are bad PACs. And so please remember that there are good PACs.
Yeah, and just to clarify it to everybody who thinks that it sounds a little hinky, Our Revolution, the national organization, right, the Progressive Oregon PAC that Larry is chair of, it is a PAC and is an official Our Revolution, because they accept PACs because they have to, because Bernie Sanders accepted PACs. So there. Right.
And I have a question. As a PAC, Oregon has a tax credit for donations, right, for political action committees as well as candidates and parties. So are donations to Progressive Oregon tax deductible, or do they establish that tax credit, that $50 per person tax credit?
Yeah, the language is completely confusing. So there's two different things. There's a deduction and then there's a credit. A deduction means that you can take that off of your income and you get a part of the money back. A tax credit is actually much better because you get dollar for dollar returned for you. It used to be more generous, and it still is $50 per person or $100 per couple. But they've now put income limits on that. So if you make over a certain amount of money, you can't even take advantage of that anymore. But it is a dollar for dollar deduction off of the state tax you pay that you can direct towards a candidate or towards your county party or towards your state party.
But can they also do it for Progressive Oregon?
Absolutely. Any PAC, that is a tax credit which you can take. So if you contribute money to a PAC, you can take that as a tax credit up to the limit of $50 per person.
Thanks.
Well, let's go to our next topic. So the slide is called Homework Assignment. There's a book that was been on the New York Times bestsellers list called How Democracies Die. And the authors, Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt, have written this book. And what they've done is they've studied democracies around the world, and they have documented the process by which governments atrophy and basically turn into authoritarian governments or whatever they become. And it was very timely because of the Trump election and the way that President Trump has behaved in office, and scares the bejesus out of many of us, because democracy is really a gentleman's agreement. It is rules that we have agreed to abide by so that we don't go out and shoot each other. And it's nothing more than rules. And one of the shocking things we discovered over the past couple of years that there's no one really that enforces those rules. So if you find something going wrong in your political party, you can't go to the police and say, "Hey, they're violating my democratic rights." You can't go to the state police. You can't go to the Secretary of State. You can't go to the governor. There is no one that can come and help you. So democracy is a set of rules, and we've talked about those rules. The rules are the bylaws of your organization. They're the state laws, and then underneath that are the bylaws of whatever organization the bylaws of the organization by which you belong to. And underneath that, if they've adopted them, are some of the various forms of parliamentary procedure. So the state legislature follows Mason's rules of order, and most organizations like the Democratic Party follow Robert's rules of order. But those are just rules and gentleman's agreement on how we're going to behave to each other. You see this a lot in the discussions in Congress. The rules for the Senate were written by Jefferson originally, and the House of Representatives also developed their own rules, roughly based on parliamentary procedure in England. And they are different than Robert's Rules of Order, and you see them tweak it from time to time. So there used to be a rule that it took 50% or 60% to confirm some of the positions. They were not, the Republicans were refusing to confirm a lot of Obama's appointments, and the positions were being left open. So the Democrats took the extreme measure of changing the rule that lowered that limit. And they were very much aware that if they lost control of the majority, that change could come back to bite them, and it kind of has. So How Democracies Die is a book that talks about really how democracies they lose the underlying principles by which it works. And it's critically important that we are governed by someone by who the majority has elected. When you don't have that, and this is at the presidential level, and it's at the state level, and it's at the local level, if you have someone that the majority didn't elect, you get contention and you get strife. Here in Clatsop County, for a number of years, we had a county commission that was dominated by Republicans, even though they're a minority in the county. And there was contention because they voted their set of beliefs that was in odds with the majority in the county. And so if you want to have a harmonious society where everyone is not out shooting each other, it is important for us to abide by these democratic principles so that we settle arguments by words and not guns. So if you don't want to go out and buy the book, which is available on Amazon for $15, or at your local bookstore, hopefully, if you have one, you can also listen to an interview by Ezra Klein on the Ezra Klein Show on the Vox Network. And you can just Google Ezra Klein, How Democracies Die, and you'll get that podcast. It's about an hour long, and it's the authors of the book sort of giving a summary of what they've discovered. But the evidence is exactly what we are talking about in the show today. It's where you have an election, but you don't have an election really because you don't have a choice on the ballot. You have to have a choice on the ballot for the wheels of democracy to turn properly. And if you don't have that, then everything starts falling apart. And I don't know if you're on, I believe it was Amazon, the last episode of Electric Dreams, which is a set of stories based on the writings of Philip Dick, is about a totalitarian society where they don't have opponents. And it was just so striking to see that story show up in that series that was written a number of years ago. Anyway, I highly recommend for everyone to read that book. And then if you are one of these people who think that it's cool to suppress democracy and discourage people from running for office so that we have to vote for incumbents, I really hope you read this book so you understand that the effects of what you are doing. You might think that, well, this is just a corner case here in Oregon, but I mean, that it's the same as polluting. If you go and dump battery acid in your backyard, maybe it's just in your backyard, but cumulatively, you wreck the environment, and cumulatively we're wrecking our democracy by not having a healthy system. Any questions about that, Betsy?
No question, but it seems like you could sum it up with people stopped voting and people stopped running. Right? Yeah.
Alana talked about the lack of people voting, and a little bit of it is voter suppression, which has to stop. People should be outraged because the Republicans do voter suppression. They should be outraged that we elected a Republican as Secretary of State to be in charge of that system from a party that has been dragged into court repeatedly for voter suppression. But that's who we have running the voting system in Oregon now. Again, I don't know. I guess it's kind of like the frog in the boiling water syndrome. People don't realize how bad it is, and I'm afraid it's going to be gone and too late by the time people truly wake up. Anyway, on that depressing note, we do have upcoming events in democracy. So the date to remember is March 6th. It's the filing deadline for all of those candidates that I hope you all are out rustling around and searching for to file for office. We have the 2018 Platform Convention of the Democratic Party of Oregon. Multnomah County elected their delegates, and they had more delegates sign up this year than they've ever had before. They have a process by which you can still join in. So if you want to be a delegate to the Platform Convention in March, please contact the leadership of the Multnomah County Democrats, if you're a Multnomah County Democrat, and they will get you on the list. They have more positions than they're possibly going to fill. It's something like 264 positions, and they filled around 74 of them last week. So there's a lot of runway for you to join there. It's the Platform Convention where the platform of the Democratic Party will be defined for the next 2 years.
And I'm going to jump in and tell everybody why they should care. Because Justin Bryce put on the platform and on the legislative action items or initiatives, whatever they're called, words about engagement broadcasting, everybody. And that you want to talk about implementing change within a party. So here we are putting words into the Democratic platform of Oregon about needing to implement engagement broadcasting with their constituents. and they're going to go, okay, and I have to, so I'm a delegate, and Larry's a delegate, and Ashley's a delegate, and Justin's a delegate, and we're all going to go up there, and we're going to have them add these, we're going to talk to them why they need to add these words, and then that means they have to do something about it, or we have to make them do something about it. But that's change. All right, I'm done.
And we talked about yesterday live streaming from the convention itself. So
Yes.
Stay tuned for that. We might be breaking in at times over the weekend and giving everyone an update of what happened. So if you are not able to attend for whatever reason, you can at least see what's going on and how this democratic process works.
Yes, we will be live streaming. Absolutely. Fun times.
So the question of cost comes up, and people are horrified that they have to pay to go to this thing. It turns out that these things are expensive, and the Democratic Party of Oregon, we have talked about making them free in the past, and we've not made any headway. So again, get involved and make sure that when you elect delegates to the State Central Committee, you get delegates that are committed to having conventions that you can attend without paying if that's important to you. Again, all of these elected people inside the Democratic Party are the ones that make these decisions and can affect things. So, you have to understand the system if you need them to change. The good news is that there's a first-time charge of $25, which is slightly less than half of what they charge people who had attended previously. So, hopefully that's not a barrier. There's also going to be scholarships given out for those for whom the $25 would be a barrier. And I recommend going to the Democratic Party website to find out about the scholarship process.
Also, Larry, some parties like the Douglas County Democrats, we actually have a fund that helps pay people's expenses to attend the platform convention. So if they can't afford, they can ask for money for transportation, motel costs, and fees associated with the convention.
That's awesome. And Multnomah County will be hiring a bus, at least one bus, to truck people down for the days of the convention. So hopefully, if your counties value this, they can subsidize the delegates so that it's not a huge personal expense to participate in democracy. April 26th is when the ballots drop, and then election day this year is May 15th. So stay tuned. We're going to devote a show in 2 weeks to just answering everyone's questions. So we're going to be putting out some forms for people to submit questions, and you can submit questions on anything that you'd like that related to democracy and politics in Oregon, and we will do our best to answer them. So that'll be in 2 weeks. My guests for next week will be legislators, and I'm trying to arrange a panel of people from across Oregon so we can talk about this problem of finding candidates running for office and why it seems to be so difficult. We have a couple of thank yous. We've had a number of equipment failures at Uphill Media over the past couple of weeks, and it's it takes money to make all of this stuff work, even though it is a volunteer base that's running everything at Uphill Media and is producing all of these great shows like We the People and Progressive Washington and Progressive California, in addition to Progressive Oregon. We want to do a special thanks to Willow, Dan, and Justin. Willow sent me a check for $10 in this card, and it says Uphill Media rocks. And then she included a really long letter about how much she appreciates what Uphill Media does for the live stream broadcasting and the shows that we do. And then Dan and Justin were two of our contributors from here in Oregon who made donations in the past year. Thank you all for the money you send in. And for anyone else who would like to contribute, you can do that at progressiveor.org if you would like your money to go to Progressive Oregon, or if you would like to go to Uphill Media to actually help support the infrastructure that makes these shows possible, you can go to donate.uphillmedia.org. And do we have any final thoughts, Betsy or John?
Yes. Guys, go to uphillmedia.org and subscribe to our Action Network because we're trying to get everybody over there. We will be pushing out newsletters, and there will be things in there that you cannot find on our channel or anywhere else. There you go.
And what's our closing number, Betsy?
Me?
Yes.
Yeah, you picked it. You picked it.
All right. It is. I gotta look it up. I don't even remember it off the top of my head.
All right. It's Hold On Hope.
It's Hope.
There you go.
Yeah. By the Voices. And I think that it's just kind of, hope is, our hope is people running for office,
I would agree with that. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Betsy.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Every street is dark and floating out mysteriously. Well, that's the chance we take to be always working, reaching out for a hand that we can't see. Everybody's got a hold on hope. It's the last thing that's holding me. Invitation to the last dance. Then it's time to leave. That's the price we pay when we deceive one another. Animal mother, she opens up for free. Everybody's got a hold on hope. It's the last thing that's holding me. Look at the talk box and the new frustration at the station. There hides the cowboy. Look at the talk box, new frustration.